welcome back to the Collin Cadmus Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kevin Dorsey. Kevin went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison and started his sales career where he quickly rose from entry-level selling to high-ranking leadership roles at SnackNation, ServiceTitan, PatientPop, and Bench Accounting. He's built sales teams from 0 to 150 reps and scaled revenue north of 100 million ARR. Kevin believes in focusing on the person in salesperson, and he shares his sales wisdom across social media, speaking engagements, podcasts, and most recently through the creation of his new online course, the Sales Leadership Accelerator. Kevin serves as an advisor to top startups around the world. He's the host of the Live Better, Sell Better podcast, and he's become a prominent voice in the B2B sales community. It's been a while since we've last collaborated, so I'm excited to catch up and dive into 5 very important topics. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Let's go, my man. This is long overdue. We used to vibe on so much, and then you get busy and you're like, damn, it's been a year. Like, what happened? So no, pump, man. Thanks for having me and excited to dive in.
Likewise. Yeah, time flies, man. But, what did we do? We did some air call speaking engagements together. What was that called? I can't even remember what it was called. The State of Sales, right?
I think so.
There were a bunch of them. But we did your podcast too. We did the Live Better, Sell Better as well. So that's out there. That's actually linked on my website, although I forget what episode number it is, but if anyone wants to check that out. But it's been probably a couple years at least, maybe more, probably closer to like 2019, I think is when we last spoke. But a lot has changed. And in the last 2 episodes of my podcast, I went basically way out of the playbook of just interviewing people. And I went on some rants about the Silicon Valley collapse, the broken quota system. And now I want to bring it back and start chatting with some people and sort of dive into some of these topics. So I've got 4 main topics I want to hit on. And then the 5th one is we'll dive into your program, Sales Leadership Accelerator. So to give a quick overview to those who are listening for what we're going to dive into, we're going to dive into first, average quota attainment. 2nd, average tenure of a VP of sales. 3rd, growth at all costs / the VC mindset or VC model. And then 4th, the impact of AI on sales. We'll get your thoughts on that. And then we'll dive into your course. So straight to the point. Question number 1, the average quota attainment in B2B sales, we talk about it all the time, right? It's under 40%, which to me is unacceptable. It's atrocious. It makes no sense. It's robbery. It's wrong on so many levels. But I want to get your thoughts, sort of 2 pieces there or wherever you want to take it. Why do you think it's so low and what needs to change?
For sure. So it's also, and I want to touch on the data point real quick. Is it 40% of reps are attaining quota or a quota attainment is averaging 40%?
Good question. There might actually be both, but my understanding is that quota attainment is under 40%, not the percentage of reps. It means their average performance is below 40% of their quota.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Which probably means it's even less people hitting quota because probably the top salespeople are carrying that up, right?
That's kind of why I want to clarify the data, because I've seen some similars where it's like, 38% of reps are hitting quota, and then which would then map down to the average quota attainment being 40% is possible. Because what you're seeing, right, with a lot of people is, so this was always a problem in sales. It's just been amplified now as things get tighter, is most orgs are dumbbells, right? They have some people at the top doing, 120, 150%, whatever else. There's like nothing in the middle. There's no 90s, 80s, 70s. It's all then all of a sudden like 40 and below, right? And it's like, that's why then we get this average of the 40, because it's that missing middle there. So there's a lot of things we can unpack on why this is happening. First and foremost, it's like, are these quotas mathematically possible, right? Quotas should be based off math, right? How much pipeline can we generate per person in terms of capacity? What is our expected conversion rate? What is our expected ACV? What is our expected sales cycle? I can math my way into what a quota should be from a conversion rate standpoint and a capacity standpoint, which is something a lot of people miss. It's like, all right, well, if our conversion rate's 30%, cool, then we can hit X, Y, Z. It's like, yeah, but do your reps have the capacity to generate that much pipeline? And so that's the first, is just, are these quotas even based off of math? And then have you updated the math? Conversion rates when money was free were 28 to 34%. Well, if conversion rates now are 17%, either you have to double the amount of pipeline you need to get to that quota, or you need to reduce the quota. because mathematically it's impossible. So there's the math side of this that most companies are still just not paying attention to, and they're unrelenting to let go of it. They're like, well, quotas were this. We need more revenue. We can't possibly lower quotas if we need more revenue. And that's not always how it works. I have lowered quotas and watched revenue go up.
Yes,
I know, and
got
I
a
know
whole blog on that.
like,
Yeah,
I think you and I talked about this a long time ago.
The mental game, man. It's the mental game. When you're losing, you're going to lose harder. You're winning, you're going to win bigger.
Right. Like one of the most important things besides math when it comes to quota attainment is believability. If I believe I can hit my quota, it's amazing how much closer I get to that quota than if I wake up going, I can't hit that. All the behavior changes, all the mindset changes, all the actions change. So believability in quotas is I've quite literally have reduced quotas by 30% and watched revenue jump over 18%.
Same.
Like,
yep.
Duh. So
almost the same numbers too.
Right. It was funny. Yeah. It's pretty consistent there, right?
I want to say we went down by 20%. And then we saw like a 40% spike in revenue.
Right.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you bring up that bottom. You bring up that middle, right? Where my goal for my orgs is 80 above 80. I want 80% of my org above 80% quota attainment, right? I try to set my floor at 80%, right? Because if your floor is 80%, you crush your number, right? Orgs miss their number because of all the 40%ers, 30%ers, 20%ers, 0%ers that come. That's what, but if your floor is 80%, you rise up all the ships. So that's the first, is knowing the math and checking that math and going, is this possible? I was working with a company a few weeks ago where like, all right, yeah, like, okay, so then that means the SDR quotas need to be, 20 opportunities. Like, no. Quotas are not a need. Quotas are math. You need 20 opportunities per AE, but your SDRs aren't producing 20 per. So you need 3 times as many SDRs to get there, or you have to lower that from a capacity standpoint. So that's one on the leadership side. But I will flip it now to the rep side of, we have to be better. Like, I'll go out here and I'll say it. Reps are not better now than they were 4 years ago. I will stand on that hill. That sellers are not better sellers today than they were 4 years ago.
Do you think that's a remote thing? Has the training lost its flair?
Ooh, all right, we can go down this path. All right, so let's do this.
If you want to, I'm curious.
I can go there. I can absolutely go there. So
I think it's good to go there. Yeah.
Okay. So one, as if we look at the 4 years, right, we have immensely overemphasized tooling versus skill. Every problem was viewed from a tool aspect. We're not booking enough meetings. We need a tool for it. We aren't, booking enough revenue. We need a tool for it. We need a
It almost became our religion, right? Because we're selling the tools, and then we're just like, we need more tools. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We need more tools, right? And there's the classic quote: "A fool with a tool is still a fool."
I love that.
And because we didn't focus on skill, we gave a lot of individuals tools without the skills to actually leverage them, right? And so then if you look at the skill side of the industry, okay, we've got all these tools, we've got them all, okay, but are reps writing better emails today than they were 4 or 5 years ago? Are reps better on the phones today than they were 4 or 5 years ago?
Definitely not.
Are reps more creative in their outreach today than they were 4 or 5 years ago? Like, all of these things we've just haven't gotten better at, right? Disco isn't any better than it was 4 or 5 years ago. The pitch isn't any better. Pricing isn't any better. So from a skill level, reps have not leveled up their skills to keep going as the market is getting harder, right? Everyone's default when things got harder was to do more, where the default should have been to get better. Stop doing more of what's not working and get better at it, right? So if we unpack this from an industry standpoint, most sales onboardings are how long? Most sales onboarding programs are how long?
Couple days.
Couple days.
Oh, sorry. Sales onboarding. A week. A week.
Right. Week to 2 weeks. Right. 2 weeks is.
I was thinking customer
average.
onboarding. Yeah.
Yeah. No. For
sales training, a week to 2 weeks. Yeah. 1 to 2 weeks.
2 weeks for onboarding. Right.
And by the way, to your point, you're adding all these tools. Now we're spending most of the time training them how to use the tools.
On tools. That's right? What enablement has focused almost more to tooling than sales skill development. Then you say, okay, that's 2 weeks of onboarding. I believe the studies that have come out recently say that roughly 73% of reps feel they do not get true regular coaching from their managers. Most reps do not practice more than once a month.
And the other 20% of the top reps that don't want the coaching, by the way, right?
Right. They don't even want it. They don't feel it's valuable, right? So we have orgs that don't practice. We have orgs that don't train. We have orgs that don't inspect. And then we have sellers that are now in this addicted to speed, I'll say environment where they don't invest in things. I've been asked many times, I'm sure you have, like, why I haven't written a sales book. I say, because sellers don't read. Sellers don't read. Right, like you go look at the sales books that are all listed there, right? It'll get 100 views at most at this point, right?
So they buy them so they can take quotes and post them on LinkedIn,
right? And post them on LinkedIn. Yeah, that my favorite one for sure to this day is Challenger Sale, because everyone says they've read it and most people have not. And
no, they've read the Harvard Business Review, the one pager,
right? Yeah, the one pager on it. Yeah. So the skill level, y'all, we're not as good as we need to be, and honestly, we're not as good as we once were, right? Because we've gotten so addicted to speed that now it's like, I'm sure you get this. I do. I'm an exec right now. I get 15 to 20 cold emails a day, minimum. Sometimes it's higher than that. Less than 5% of them are personalized. Less than 5%. Yet we all know a personalized email will do better than a non-personalized email, less than 5%. I get 0 videos a month as
that's the big loss, right? Because personalization, it's almost lost its touch in many ways because it's not personal. But the video piece, it's like that really is what gets my attention because so few people do it. And I'm curious enough that I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna click play.
And even then, most people just don't do it enough to get good at it. Oh, I sent 10 videos. I didn't get a response. It's like, well, first of all, video emails are not built for response. The videos to get watched. You call the people that watch, y'all. Like, we're worse on the phone. So it's all those things, man. We're like, we have to get back to getting better at what we do, right? Better at what we do. And then make sure that the numbers add up to get us to our quota, right? I'll throw the last one out there of just like persona knowledge is so lacking with most reps. It's actually my biggest fear with ChatGPT because it's a value and it's a knock is it's making the research even easier and faster to do, which is actually making the absorption and application worse. Because when you had to read that 10K, when you had to read it, you were reading that shit and you understood it and you were highlighting it and you were doing it with intention. Now that I can just upload a 10K and get the top 5 bullet points and then ask it to connect its dots to industry trends and then ask it to connect dots to our product and then ask it to create 5 different value props I could send to them, I didn't do it. And because of that, my application of it is going to be less. So there's a lot of things we'll unpack on AI, but that's my quota stuff, man. It's got to be math, got to be back on skills. That will bring it up.
It's like the same thing that happened back in the day before our time to mathematics, right? They used to have a job title called calculator, and they were people that would sit around with these abacus things and they would move the little beads up and they would be counting things. And when they came out with a machine calculator, they probably went through the same thing you just described, which is like, now we just punch in the numbers, we get the result. Mm-hmm. Humans, basically, the majority of us don't know how that math is actually happening. We couldn't recreate, many of those equations in the background. ChatGPT is now doing that to language and information.
Mm-hmm. Even now to math. I watched a video last week on an iPad, someone writing the equation and then it's solving it. Writing the equation.
Yeah.
It reads it and it solved it. I'm like, oh my God, where are we going? Where are we going? So that's my quota take. That's my make it off math, get our skills back up. We got to be better now, y'all. Like I tell my own team, better or bitter. It's our choice. Either we can get better throughout all this or we can get bitter.
Or we're going to be better.
Us. Yeah. But the people that are better throughout all this, they're going to win.
Yeah. Cool. So mathematically possible. And I would highlight there that what you mean by that, if I'm understanding correctly, is that we need to be setting quotas based on achievability, right? And we're using math to determine that. Whereas what is generally happening in the VC model is we're setting quotas. They're using math, but they're doing it to get to a certain valuation. They're doing it to be able to say, like, here's our forecast. We're going to have this many heads. We're going to put up this much in quota. And the problem that they often run into is that in order to paint this picture of, whether it's T2, D3 or whatever ridiculous, number they're promising to their investors, is they just have to put these absurd quotas in the spreadsheet, right? And my sort of fix to this problem is to try to encourage them to use a different metric Stop using quota to paint the picture of what's possible. Instead, use your average revenue forecast. That way, you don't have to actually hold the reps accountable for these absurd numbers. If you could say, here, we're aiming for this average performance, we're aiming for our reps to overachieve by 120%, and here's our plan on how we're going to do that. At least if you don't get to that absurd number, your team still hit their goal, right? And that's kind of to your point of what you said before, is like when we lower these quotas, we often see better performance because a huge driver is just the mindset, right? If you've got a team full of people that haven't hit quota in 6 months, and every time you put a meeting on their calendar, they're worried they're getting fired, like their foot's half out the door, right? They're printing resumes at lunchtime. They're but when you can make those quotas achievable and get to a place where you have some people that are hitting quota by the 15th of the month and most that are hitting it by the 20th or 25th or whatever, they're entering that sort of more relaxed mindset sooner in the month. And that's where I think that peak performance really unlocks itself. And you see it. I mean, I don't know if it's the same for you, but in every company I've worked at, the beginning of the month, assuming you're on a monthly quota schedule, you reset, the score is 0-0 on the first day. People are usually pretty high strung, right? For the first couple weeks, especially if they're trending behind. But once they get past that sort of like, oh, I'm going to keep my job this month, it's like the deals seem to just start flowing easier. Yeah. So I think that mental advantage is huge.
Yep, I agree. You used a very important word there of like, companies make quotas what they need to be, not what they should be.
Bingo.
Quota should never need it to be something. This is what it should be based off the math of things. And like I preach it to my team. I was like, I want you hitting quota by that third week if we're on monthly, or by like the third month if we're quarterly, so that you are starting the next month actually on hot. I could care less, right? Because if my team's doing it the right way, like, hey, you could push 4 more deals in this month. I quite literally actually would rather you start your next month off with those 4 deals, because it's going to get your momentum going. It takes that pressure off. You can sell the way you're supposed to sell. Whereas once you need the deal, then all the sales fundamentals go out the door. We push, we don't pull, we get scammy, we get all the things that we need to do.
Sales breath. I call it sales breath. Yeah, you sound desperate.
Smell it.
Yep.
So that's what we got to fix, man.
I love it. So I'm with you, man. So it's really about like, hey, stop using quotas as a lever to, make some ridiculous forecast and boost the valuation. Do that anyway. If you want to promise big numbers, you have to do it. Fine. But stop holding people's jobs to these absurd, numbers that, to your point, are not mathematically based in reality.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And then the training piece is huge too. So, all right, let's talk a little bit, and this will probably, this will start to pivot us towards, I think, what you're working on. You're trying to solve a lot of these problems with your course. But the average VP of sales is under 18 months. I mean, there's obviously a direct correlation to, that 40% quota attainment. But what are your thoughts there? Why do you think it's so low? I mean, obviously the quota attainment piece is in there, but are there bigger pieces that we're missing? Are there things we can change? Are there things VPs can do today to help avoid falling into that trap? Wherever you want to go with that topic.
For sure. So what I've always loved about that stat that I don't think enough people talk about is when people hear that stat, everybody assumes that they're getting canned after a year and a half. That's not actually the reality behind a lot of the data there. It's the tenure is 18 months. That also includes people that leave, right? And so everyone hears it like, oh, it's because they're all getting fired in 18 months. It's actually not the case. You have 2 buckets of VPs, right? You have the ones that get in and aren't good at their job, right? They're not good at their job. They're missing their marks. They're not communicating things. And most companies give them about a year to see if they're any good. They don't want to be assholes, so they don't like chop them right before a vest. Although there's some
they make the decision at the month. They make the decision at 9 months.
They've made the choice. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. They've made
those
the
last
choice
3 months is like your long-standing funeral. Yeah.
Okay. Right. And then like they finish out the quarter and then they bring in somebody new. Right. So if you're getting fired within 18 months, right, there's a lot of things that probably went into that, where, okay, how well did you know your numbers and metrics? How were your accuracies with forecasting? How did you actually make things better? Because that's the other thing. If after 18 months the org is not better, you shouldn't be there. Like, our job is to make it better.
Agreed.
It's not just to hit the number, it's to make it better than it was. If that org is trending on the up and up, that is there, right? But also you have to like, what numbers did you agree to? There's far too many VPs that agree to numbers they should never agree to. They got to take some ownership in that. You said you could hit this and you never worked backwards from it. You never did the capacity planning from it. You never actually analyzed the CAC and what we could spend on like that. That's a miss on the VP side. So if you're getting fired in 18 months, more often than not, it means you didn't set up the systems, you didn't set up the processes, you didn't make the org better, and you probably agreed to some numbers that you shouldn't have agreed to, right? Which actually leads to the other side of the equation here, right? I left my last role after 18 months. I left.
Was it 18 on the dot? I think
Pretty
mine
much.
was. I think mine was about the same. Yeah.
I consulted for 3 months and then joined. Was there for a year and a half and left. So like right about 18 months. Yeah. I left for the same reasons. The numbers were no longer adding up. The promises that were made were no longer being upheld. I wasn't allowed to make the changes necessary to drive the impact that I needed. And this is an org, by the way, that was twice as big when I joined than when I left. And that org that I left at that point was outproducing what the org was a year and a half ago at half the size of the reps, right? So we got significantly better, right? And
so they probably lost a ton of customers when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, right?
So you're talking about bench. We were SMB, so like we were minimally, right? Because
okay.
What's interesting in this space is you actually have 2 thresholds. You have the bottom of the market that, you know, churns out because they're SMB, right? So you just have natural turnover there. Right. But like, because you were at Zenny for a bit, right? Or where were you at for a little bit, right? Like, okay. Whereas at the top end, you also outgrow a company like Bench, because like once you're doing like 5-10 million like a year, like you have someone in house for that. So we actually had 2.
They outgrow the product.
Exactly. Right. So, you know, you're doing it in-house, you go to like a Zenny, you go to something a little bit bigger, more sophisticated in terms of tooling. And so,
or even they just bring in a new CFO and they're just, they got their own way of doing things. Yeah.
You know, so there was a natural actually outgrow point as well there. And like the industry, I mean, now has it a little bit too, but like the key around, it's like I left because once you're also good at what you do, you can start to see whether or not it's going to be what you want it to be. Yeah. And so these VPs, right? Because this is what's just so fun about this, man, is like that stat came from, I'll call it the glory years of SaaS. So what was happening? You know this. You were a VP CRO. The glory years, 20, 21, 22. How many offers were you getting per week, Collin? Especially as someone with a brand, it was good constant. What they do.
It was constant.
Constant. So that also is what's fed into this narrative of this short tenure is you were getting 2 offers a week in your inbox. 500K, 600K, 2 points.
The numbers kept growing.
700. Yeah. I saw my first 7-figure offer in 2021. Seven fig, right? Offer. Okay. But I didn't take it because the numbers didn't
imagine the revenue you got to, right? That they're going to tie you to that. The numbers
didn't add up. So that also part of that is you had VPs just leaving their job because every single 12 months you could get a new offer. You're vesting. So it's twofold there, right? But VPs need to do a better job of knowing what they're signing up for, pushing back on things that aren't real, right? That was part of what eventually I was like, all right, no, because they were trying to force a plan that was not going to work. I was like, y'all, this isn't going to work. Mathematically, capacity-wise, acquisition cost-wise, this will not work. I cannot put a wet signature on this. I cannot and will not sign off on
I would say
plan.
It sometimes takes us a year in the job to really know the numbers, right? Mm-hmm. Like we can do a good review and half the time they won't even really give you enough data before you accept the job. You know, like you try to, can you just send me your your P&L, your financial plan? Like, they're usually a little bit, tight-lipped with some of that stuff, but it's really once you get settled in there that you have a very good perspective of the numbers. And that's when you're like, wait a minute, you want to raise this next year? Like, hold on, I'm just realizing now that this I probably shouldn't have agreed to, right?
Right. And those are the things that happen to VPs is like, they don't get into the numbers at all. It's like, because there's knowing the numbers and there's also just, I'll say, having the experience to know when it doesn't add up.
Yeah.
right? Like if I made like a fictional company for y'all right now and said, all right, last year conversion rates were 17%, quota attainment was 74%, average deal size was $13,000. And this year, to hit the plan, we need conversion rates to be 25%. We need to raise prices by 15%. And we actually are going to spend less on marketing. We're going to have our AEs now go full cycle. I don't need to know anything about that company's history to be like, those numbers won't work. They just won't work. There's no plan in there, which is the next part I will address, is too many VPs are what thinkers and they're not how thinkers. They agree to the what. What do we need to do? We got to get our conversion rates up to 25%. Okay. How are you going to do that? Oh, we're going to have a tighter deal inspection process. Okay. What does that look like? Who's owning that? Who's responsible for it? What does that need to look like? All those things. There's not enough how, right? So they get these plans, and I'm going to keep going back and forth between where blame lies. There's companies that have numbers that are not hittable. There's also VPs that get numbers that are hittable that don't come up with actual plans to get there. They just preach down the what to their team without getting into that. Well, how are we going to do it? How do we produce that pipeline? How do we improve our messaging? How do we level up our skills? How do we add 20% to our bot? Like all those, there's things that you can do. Most VPs don't get into the how of it enough. So that's what I think contributes, man, is like one, the tenure thing I think was twofold. I think VPs leave if they're not treated well, things are not set up, or they're getting a better offer. Then also a lot of early VPs are set up to fail, right? Like my tenures have been very interesting. I was at SnackNation for 5 years. I was at ServiceTitan for 1.5 years. I was at PatientPop for 4 years, Bench for 1.5 years. And then my hope is like where I'm at now, which will be announced hopefully relatively soon, is another 4 to 5 year run, right? Like I don't like I'm in these things for a minute, right?
Out of that journey, which would you say, and maybe it's not company specific, it might be more just like the time period. What was the heyday? Was it PatientPop?
Ooh, I'll say PatientPop was, I'll say, probably my best performance to date.
If you were there when I was at AirCall, right? So I was at Doctor.com, who's a competitor of PatientPop. And I think right as I left there, you came into PatientPop, I went to AirCall, right? And so those were like the hot years, I think, in our SaaS career.
Yeah. That was, if I look back at performance wise of it was the applying of what I learned at SnackNation, because that was a machine, but it wasn't a great product, right? It's snacks in a box, right? People don't understand, y'all. Like I got SnackNation to 30 million in ARR in under 3 years selling snacks in a box.
That had to be I was looking through your experience before we did this, but it just looks like the perfect way to get into sales, though. I imagine you have no regrets there.
Oh, God, no, absolutely not. I built a machine there, right? Like, because think about that. We're selling a product that has no tangible ROI, no software behind it. We can never talk to the decision maker. It's actually a relatively high ticket item for a lot of these companies to do. The ACV there was
it like office snacks? Teams. Is that
like
the concept?
Snacks, right? Yeah. So I joked, I called it SNAS, right? Snacks as a service instead of SaaS, because the model was the same. It's just a different type of product. So to build that type, like I had to really build the systems and the tooling and the messaging to sell a product like that. Right. So then you move on, then you give me like a real product, like a PatientPop, bro. Like that's when it all came. I 30 some reps on the inside team. We peaked out at over 120 on that, and then also had the field team out there. And then we went through COVID, so we had that massive drop, and then built it back up again. And I said, all right, y'all, I need a break from all this, right? And then actually, I think the glorious years actually was the year after I left PatientPop. That's when I did like the year of consulting with like Winning by Design. That's when everyone was just billion unicorn. Everyone's just cutting checks on
money was
everything.
Flowing.
Like that was that year, I think, was like the heyday. And it was towards the end of 2022 that you started to see the signals of like, ooh, something's changing here. It's starting to pull back a little bit, So that was a fun time.
We felt it in consulting too, right? Because I think it's they say like, but based on certain industries, you can sort of tell how the economy is doing. Like when I launched my consultancy, it grew to a 6-figure business within like a month or two without any outbound. Like it just comes in because people were all looking for that help. It's definitely not like that today, right? You got to do a little bit more work to make that kind of money. It's not people just throwing away money, and not that they're throwing it away, but I would say they're not spending on growth like they were.
Nope. Not
they're trying to conserve. They're trying to conserve that cash.
Yep. And everything has to be proven, back to the VP side of things. It's like, there's a lot of consultants out there that can't actually prove what they're teaching works. They can't actually point to say this is the impact that it will have. Because again, a lot of them aren't actually using this, right? Like that's the stuff that needs to happen with it. So it's very interesting. This is, again, you just got to be better all the time. Like you just got to be better, even as a consultant, as a leader. I have to be better now than I was 2-3 years ago. And every day I'm striving to be better because I have to be better. Because if I can be better for my team, then my team can be better for our prospects. And that's what gets the wheels turning. Because I stay in touch with a lot of my former leaders. And like they'll ask for something like, hey, do you still have X, Y, and Z? And I'll send something over to them. They're like, ooh, like this is new. It's like, what do you think I've been doing? You think I'm literally doing the same thing I was 3 years ago? Like it's all elevating and changed over the last 3-4 years, 6 months, 9 months. So we have to be changing as leaders for sure.
Love it. All right, let's dive into growth at all cost. I want to get your thoughts on this. And again, these all sort of piggyback off one another. So the VC model or growth at all cost model, I think is probably what's changing the most in SaaS, just as this overarching sort of umbrella that trickles down and affects everything. And actually, one thing I wanted to add in there that sort of ties into this too is the competitive nature has changed too, especially in leadership, right? There's a lot more VPs of sales out there today than there were probably 10 years ago with SaaS experience. And a lot of them are getting deep industry experience and all that sort of stuff. So that's going to make it more competitive. At the same time, and that's happening with AEs and SDRs even as well, right? There's just more of them on the market because we've been hiring all these entry-level college grads for almost 2 decades now, probably, right? Maybe more like 15 years straight. So over time, like that just saturates everything, which means, to your point, that's why I wanted to add it there, is if you're not continuously getting better, but there's more competition out there and they're accruing experience, right? So you may not have, I don't know, most AEs, maybe they want to move up or they have aspirations to do different things, but there's still this bench that sort of keeps building of AEs that want to be career AEs. So the longer that this SaaS thing goes on, the more of that you're up against, right? And so it's just not going to be as easy. Yeah, you have to keep getting better. All right, cool. So the B2B SaaS venture model, it's evolved into what we refer to as the growth at all cost mindset. For those who don't understand, it basically means when they raise capital, they are allocating about 80 to 90% of that growth capital towards sales and marketing, which at least, from what I see with a lot of clients, a lot of people who reach out complaining, or even just stuff that we see on LinkedIn, is it tends to mean they're not prioritizing the product. And they can get away with this for a couple of years after that round of capital. But seems like there's this pattern where then the product just doesn't stay up. Like to your point, the reps need to keep getting better, but so does the product in most cases, right? Because you're just going to have all these competitive forces that are coming in. So you raise this money, you make all of these hires, and then all of a sudden, and Doctor.com, PatientPop, great example. We were the bootstrapped startup, right? And all of a sudden, PatientPop, is raising way more money, way more resources that could move way faster than us. And so it's like, okay, well, now I'm in my 3rd year as a VP of sales. I've doubled revenue for 3 years straight. And now we're sitting down talking about year 4. And they're like, well, you need to double it again. I'm like, hold on. You realize that when you say double, that is a significantly bigger number than it was 3 years ago, because we're doubling what we doubled 3 times already. And now we're up against PatientPop, who has raised enormous amount of money. They have significantly more employees than us. And like, what am I supposed to do here? Just smile and say, yeah, sure, we're going to do that. And then I'm going to have the worst year of my life. And so to your point, like that is why I left there, because it was that conversation of just like, but these numbers don't make sense, right? The competitive landscape has changed, and doubling a number that's already been doubled 3 times is not the same amount of growth, right? You're talking about a tremendous amount of money. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. If you have any, you know, am I seeing this only through my own lens, through just a small scope? Or do you see the same thing, that there's this sort of trend that happens where they raise this money, they go so heavy in sales and marketing, and the product sort of takes a back seat, and then a year or two later, you kind of can't catch up to some new competitors that just leapfrogged you?
So I'll say yes and no to it, right? So most companies actually aren't spending 89, like the GAC model, the growth at all cost, wasn't so much based on the percentage of spend as much as it was how much that you were willing to spend to get it, right? So the LTVs to CACs were so out of line, where it's like the CAC payback was 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, right? So their
sometimes they're even paying $3 to earn a buck,
to earn
and they're like, we just want the growth. It's like you're literally burning money. You're buying customers at a loss.
Actually, I haven't seen many companies that are doing like 80-90% to sales and marketing, right? Because the engineering resources are also very expensive, right? What happens is I actually see most companies get to a point where they don't know how to continue to scale the revenue engine, right? Because when you're at 10 reps, that's very different than 20 reps, which is very different. Like that 20 to 50 is where most orgs fail, because at 20 reps, if you're a good VP, you can still kind of control that. You can control 20. Like if you're decent at what you do, you're close enough to it that you can control it if you're good. When you're at 50, you can't. And
you become a leader of leaders at that point. Yeah.
And that's when the lack of systems and process and documentation exposes, right? Because when you have 20, and this is how the math works out, you got 20. We're going to have your top 10 percenters. That's 2 reps that are just always crushing your number. Then you're going to have your next 40% that are consistently in that 100, right? That 100 range. And then you've got your bottom, right, 50-ish% that are kind of like you'll see, but the top 50% can make up for it. When you're at 50 reps, that math doesn't work anymore, because you don't have 5 people blowing out the number. You still only got those 2. And then you don't have 40% of people hitting that 100. Now you've got 20. And so it doesn't scale. That's where I actually see most people break, is their go-to-market engine for 20 doesn't match what needs to happen at 50, right? And then you compound that with the product either not keeping up, right? Or it's just honestly, like most products, like they are what they are, and they fail out and the churn goes up. So now you're paying the churn tax, where you have to grow faster to make up for the churn that's coming out because of the product, right? So in a lot of spaces, there's enough room for quite a few people to get to 50 to 100 million. There's not room for many orgs to all get to 500 mil or $1 billion in revenue, but there's plenty of room in a lot of these spaces to get to 100 mil in revenue. Most just don't, because they don't scale the GTM efficiently and effectively. Then the product isn't what their customers actually want. That's where I see most things go wrong on the product side, is they're building functions and features that aren't actually bringing more value to the customer.
Yeah.
So they're spending all this time and energy on it. And sometimes sales leaders, sometimes we're the problem, because we're going to engineering and we're saying, hey, I need this built so we can close this deal. And engineering's like, okay. And it literally helped you close one deal, but took up 3 months worth of engineering resources. And now that puts everything behind. So
that's why founders always think sales is easier than it is, right? Because they custom build the product for every sale they close. Yeah.
Funny how that works.
Yeah. How much of that? Yeah, because I'm totally with you. Going from that 20 to 50, or even sometimes it might happen after 10, it might start to break down a little bit. How much of that is just that the leader is not great at sort of delegating and leading other leaders, versus how much of that is there's just compounding problems, right? Like if you have 10 reps and there's a small little problem where, let's say, I don't know, once a month, people accidentally are reaching out to the same account, just as a silly example, but now you have 50 reps, right? So how often is that happening now? And all those inefficiencies, they compound at scale as well. And I tend to think a really good leader at scaling is really looking out for those problems and chipping away at them, because a small problem becomes a big problem as the team gets bigger. right?
Yeah. Well, so I'm actually going to put those into the same bucket because both of those to me come down to not being very system oriented. To lead leaders, you need systems. You need systems, right? Right now, I'm on this call with you. This is going to be a good hour-long podcast. And while I'm on this call, I am coaching 30 to 40 calls right now. I am providing feedback on one-on-one docs right now because it's all in a system, right? I can be here with you, and that system is allowing my leaders to lead without me having to do the thing because there's a system. Here's what the scorecard looks like. Here's what the one-on-one doc looks like. Here's what the issue diagnosis looks like, right? That it's getting ahead of it. If there's a problem with 10 people, you got to put a system in place to prevent it from being a problem with 20 people and 50. So it's the lack of systems that causes most of it because most treat sales and leadership like it's an art. Whereas if people understood how much science went into art, they'd be far more scientific with what they are doing. I just posted about this 2 days ago on how, so the acronym that, people are starting to really remember, me around is the WIGGLE, right? WGLL, pronounced wiggle, which is what good looks like. Most orgs, the what good looks like lives in that VP's head. And so then they wonder why when it goes from 10 to 20, well, at 10, it was in your head, but you could talk to those reps every single day. When it's at 20, you can only talk to a quarter of that team every single day. When it's at 50, you're talking to maybe 10% of that team every single day. And the wiggle is still in your head. And if the wiggle's in your head, you can't delegate, you can't scale, you can't create the systems that you need. That's where I see the biggest flaw for most leaders trying to make that jump from 10 to 20. I think it was in a book called either Scaling Up or Scaling Up Excellence. But he said, as you grow a company, everything breaks in multiples of 3. So like when you're just the founder selling, right? Well, once you get 3 reps, things start to break, right?
Yeah.
Things start to break. Then when you go from 3 reps to 9 reps, well, now you have to have a manager in place. Things start to break. And when you go from 9 to 27, now you've got 3 managers and you might need to start putting a director there. Things start to break. Then when you go from 27 to, well, that'd be 80, 81. Doing my math right now. Yeah, 81. Well, now you've got 8 managers, 2 directors, and things break in every multiple of 3 because it's when a new layer evolves and each layer that's created needs a new system and process to run it.
Yeah, so that brings up a point that I always talk about, which is as you're bringing on these managers, they can help to solve these problems. But one of the things that I see is that you get to a point sometimes when they're not being led by someone who really has experience leading leaders. Is the ideal scenario is, let's say you bring on 4 managers and a rep can ask any of those 4 managers a question. They should get the same answer from all 4. Right. And that goes back to your process, is that you have something consistent that's working. So one of the things that I've seen go wrong too is sometimes they bring in this leadership, but they don't have that process. They don't have that standardization. So now you kind of have sort of all these different solutions to problems being thrown around, and it can almost backfire in the same way as not even having the leadership in the first place.
It always does. It always backfires. Yeah. You cannot have 5 wiggles. That doesn't work.
Yeah,
it does not work. What is defined as what good looks like is this. Now, the wiggle is updated. I'm constantly updating what good looks like as we learn, as we grow, as we adapt. It's not static, which is also the other thing, is leaders are far too static. This is what we do. Why? This is how I did it. Oh, great. That's helpful. That's a great way to set a standard. It's preference, not proven.
Yeah.
So the wiggle's constantly changing. Constantly changing, but you need to know what it is. You need to define it. You got to study it. And then, we talk about the 4 Ds: define, document, demonstrate, and deliberately practice. Once you know the wiggle, you go through those 4 steps. Like, you can transform an org, right? Like, transform an org, right? The company I'm at right now, I'm at day 120 right now. I'm at day 120. And in these first 120 days, I've increased our lead to client conversion rate by over 72%. I've increased our ACV by over 20%, right? Increased production per rep by over 26% in under 120 days. We're closing more now than the company was 4-5 months ago on less marketing spend and less headcount in 120 days. Like, we're talking like almost doubling revenue per month, and it's not a small number of revenue. Like, you can do this shit fast if you come in and start to implement the systems necessary to execute on it.
Yeah. I love it. The art and science piece. I love to try to add in, so I think it helps people with the mindset there. Because I'm with you. Some people like to argue it's an art. Some people like to argue it's a science. It's definitely both. I also think it's also a sport and a war. And the reason I like to add that in, it's an art, a science, it's a sport, it's a war or a battle. Because I think when we think about sports and battles or wars, there's always a strategic plan. And it's always changing. And you're always looking out for that competition, right? And so I think there's that element too, where if you think too much art science, it's almost like you think that you've perfected it and it doesn't need to keep evolving. But whereas when you think sport and war or battle, you're always pivoting. You're always on your toes, right? You're always thinking about the next plan. And so I think that ties in nicely to your point there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on AI? What's going on there? Are we going to have no human salespeople soon? Do you have any hot takes on this yet? I know there's a lot going on, but what do you think?
Oh, yeah. So I guess the only part of your question that I would need to throw a question back at is the definition of soon. Do I believe that sellers are going to be replaced by AI? Yes, I do.
It's a question.
I believe I'm going to be. I believe I'm going to be replaced by AI. In fact, over a year ago now, when all this really started to go, I sat down and I wrote out all the things that I do as a leader that I think have led to me being successful. And then I put 3 columns next to it. What do I think AI can do now? What do I think it can do in 3 years? What do I think it can do in 5 years? The only checkbox on there that was not filled out at 5 years was give a genuine hug and high five. That was the only thing that I was like, I don't think it can do as well as or better than me in the next 5 years. And so I know a lot of people don't agree with that, which I think is funny because it doesn't matter if you agree with it or not.
You can't stop technology.
I am operating from a place of like, well, if I'm wrong, I'm still good. If we don't get replaced by AI, if I don't get replaced by AI, I'm wrong, we're good.
Yeah.
If they're wrong, they're not good because they haven't been preparing for it, right? So like I am doing everything I can, both professionally and personally, to prepare for this. I have a 4-year clock in my head right now where I'm doing everything I possibly can, both as a leader professionally, but also as a man personally, to prepare for the fact that I may not have the same type of job I have 4 to 5 years.
So you're thinking 5 years could
in
10 years, it's probably a sure thing.
10 years for sure, unless in any way they regulate it,
right?
Which I don't see how they can.
Yeah, I mean, they could make anything illegal, but, and I did a bunch of research on this. They've got the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951, which tells me they already had all this technology for a long time.
Yeah.
They've now they've probably been using it for military applications. They've probably been writing presidential speeches with it for decades. Now they've made the conscious choice to release it into the wild. So it's not going away.
Not going away. And what people just do not understand is how fast it is accelerating, because now you have technology aiding technology. Right. So it used to be humans made the technology better. So the actual, it's not Moore's. Is it Moore's law, the compounding law of technology? I don't know if it's Moore's, where it's like, the computer processor, basically was doubling in speed every whatever else. Right. I think it was Moore's law.
I forget what it's called, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Right. Well, but that was when humans were still involved. So technically speaking, the advancement of that technology was dependent upon the humans making it better. We're getting to a place now where AI is making itself better. So that curve just jumped up exponentially because it's able to make itself better. So I am in the place where I'm trying to learn everything I can. And I'll say I'm in a good position on this because I have so many systems, because I have everything documented, all my checklists, all my if-thens, because I have a system. I can train AI to do this stuff, right? Because right now AI is it's decent at content. It's bad at context because it doesn't really understand what it's doing.
It hallucinates a lot. Right. It says things that are blatantly untrue.
Right. Just blatantly untrue. But it's like, it sounds like it makes sense. Right.
And then you question it and it's like, oh, yeah, you're right. And you're like, wait, I can't trust you now.
You're like, all right, that's cool. So whereas
you said it with such conviction, too.
All right. And people don't question well, we're not going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Anyway, anyway, is the things around that. And so I do believe, right? Because if you think about what, a seller does, like truthfully, like what is the value a seller brings to the equation right now?
It's really information.
It's information.
Yeah.
Right. Well, information is what's being commoditized now because information is out there. So the best of the best salespeople, it's no longer about information. It's going to be about connecting the dots. Here's what the information I have on you. Here's the information I have here. Here's the information I have on the industry. I can connect the dots for you. That's what the best are going to do now to keep their jobs. In 3 years from now, connecting the dots will be easy. The trends will be easy. And truthfully, my biggest fear, especially for those selling software, I actually think it hits us sooner, is at what point is it actually easier for a company to build the tool internally? Where they go into their AI agent and go, hey, I need a dialer that will do XYZ for me, that will connect XYZ for me, that will do blank, set up blank, and give me this sort of information. And the AI agent says, got you. So now the salesperson never even had an attempt to educate because I can build it internally. That is already happening now. So that's what I keep preaching to people. Like, look, this is the worst it's ever going to be. It is only going to be 10 times better every single year. Yeah. So if we're already not quite sure if that's a human on the TV, that's now 10 times better in 3 years. You have no idea. Like, so I think we get replaced. I think the people that learn it the fastest will at least be the first, people with AI replacing people. You got to learn it. And then it does get to that point where my vision is in 5 years, can I run 5 companies at once? Can I be the CRO at 5 companies? Because I've got all the systems in place to do so, right? Maybe I can't. Maybe I can't.
You hit on a ton of good stuff there. I mean, the first piece, which I think they call like the technological singularity, which is sort of this moment in history where all of the sudden computers are becoming smarter and more capable than the human brain. And at the same time, we have robots that are becoming more physically capable than the human body. And so you combine those two together and you now have entities that can outperform us in anything. Right. And it's easy for us to roll our eyes. There's a bunch of good stuff on Netflix. There's all sorts of good videos and movies that start to portray what this stuff looks like. I forget what one of them was called, sort of like Made for Kids. And they show that she's sort of being raised by this robot and it mothers her and it knows her and it knows how to say the exact perfect things in every single situation that this little kid, I think it's called Megan, spelled with a 3 or something. It's on Netflix, but the kid basically becomes addicted to this. This is like the mother of this, child, because it couldn't be more perfect, right? It knows how to calm you it knows the perfect words that you need to hear every time.
That, funny enough, like the more and more I've been thinking about it, it's like it actually might be leadership that's easier to replace first, right? If we really think about like what it is that we do and do well, imagine having a manager that knows your communication style, knows your goals, knows your disc profile, remembers everything, notices patterns, knows your coaching style, how you learn best, is always available, can be proactive, knows how to recognize you to your recognition preferences, uses the tone that you like.
It's not going to mess up anything. And to your point, the humans can give the hugs and the high fives. However, the robot will know precisely when you need that hug
when you need it. Right? Yeah, this is the transition, right? Yeah, like it knows, right? And that's where, it's just gonna be so interesting. It's gonna be so interesting how this all plays out over the next 5 to 6 years. It just is. Will there still be sellers in 5 years? Yes, there will still be some sellers in 5 years. Like but like, because that's always the straw that people try to hold on to. It's like, well, they're never going to be fully replaced. Like,
I think we'll be selling very different things, which ties into the other piece you said, which is like, are they going to just start building their own solutions? And I think the answer is unequivocally yes. We're already seeing, if you look at, I think it's bubble.io or something like that.
I started taking Bubble courses 2 years ago, right?
That stuff's it's going to build itself soon, right? You're going to just describe to it what you want. Yeah.
Here's
So
what I need.
I think that's a good thing. And what it means, and it's probably why there's so much consolidation going on right now in SaaS, because we probably are not far away from every SaaS functionality just becoming commoditized, and Bubble does a good job explaining it for those who are confused. Bubble is a no code platform. So the same way that like Webflow, made it significantly easier to build a nice website in comparison to WordPress, where you had to, know how to write code. The same thing's happening to SaaS products, and it's early stage now. Like those builders probably have like a capacity. They probably aren't super fast. And, if you have thousands of users, they might break down, but we're not far away from that changing. And so what I think is going to happen in SaaS is, to your point, and this is the way they market it on Bubble. They say I think it's 80 or 88%. They have some number of SaaS products of how many features are just duplicatable across everything, and how many features actually make a SaaS product unique. And now we know this when we sign up for a SaaS product, right? You have the admin portal, your profile, the login, like most of the stuff is just the same. And then there's like a few things that really make that product unique or different. And that's going to be the value going forward, because all those features that are just the same, to your point, you need a CRM, like it's going to just drag drop exactly how you want it. And it's going to become about really learning like real engineering, real inventions, real concepts that are, they don't already exist. And then it's probably going to be about selling those into the larger entities that will bake it in. Like it's going to be probably less about selling these like, here's our whole platform that solves one problem. And by the way, thank God, because I think we're all getting sick of having to log into 1,000 tools for every little problem in our life, right?
Yeah. The fact that we have software to help us log into all of our softwares should already be a sign, y'all.
Yeah.
It should already be a signal that we've already handed over the keys to all of this, and I do think we think about that progression, right? Well, once people start building internally, there's still going to be context they're missing, right? There's going to be things they don't think to tell it to do.
Right.
A seller could be there for that, but now it's more of a consultant. It's like, all right, you sold, whatever, air call for whatever. So right? So it's like people are actually bringing you in to say, hey, we're going to build this internally. What are some of the prompts and things we need to say? So you have to make sure you ask it to build a duplicate checker. You need to make sure you're asking it to build a rotating number process. You're giving them the context that they're missing to build it internally, but they're not buying the product from you. They're buying your context.
Right.
We got maybe that for 3 to 4 years, but then eventually, again, AI was like, all right, I will also think through the contingencies of what could go wrong here.
Yeah, it's going to download your brain.
It's going to build it all, man. So it's going to be wild. Like I said, I don't know if I'm wrong. Cool. If I'm right, cool. I'm just going to be on the forefront of what that's going to be. And the phrase I've been using to myself quite regularly now is, if anyone's going to replace me, it's going to be me. And that is my mindset. If anyone's going to replace me, it's going to be me. I'm going to be the one that figures out how to replace me before somebody else does.
Get ahead of it.
Yeah. Because if I can replace me, then I can replace a lot of people. And that buys me another 3 to 4 years, because now I'm replacing people. I'm installing the leadership systems and processes in place for people to run on things, right? So, it's going to be a wild 5 years, man. We shall see. We shall see.
Well, I'm with you. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And then maybe there will be a comeback of sort of the consultant salesperson who's not just selling one product. Instead, they're an expert, and you come to them, you're like, hey, I'm looking for a CRM. I know you're like the guy who knows about all the CRMs, but then to your point again, if that catches on, there'll be an AI that then just
eventually
does that.
Unfortunately, y'all, what we've been paid for over the last really 15 to 20 years is our knowledge.
Yep.
We are knowledge workers. That's what they called us. Well, now knowledge is being commoditized. What's between our ears is no longer like out there. Like the 80% is now out there.
Yeah.
We still have the 20%. We still have the 20% in here that maybe isn't out here. The nuances, the context, the little
Although
things
they're stealing it from us, because every time we talk on Zoom,
they're
taking it. Yeah.
They're taking it. It's being absorbed, right? That you research, and then one of us is going to build it. One of us is going to build it, and then it's
Why do you
there.
think, what is LinkedIn's now giving away badges? They want to incentivize you to go answer questions. Well, why do you think that they want to do that?
Well, you
Are
know
they
what they
stealing?
say,
Are they
right?
stealing your information to put it into ChatGPT? No, no, they're not
No,
stealing
no,
your
no, no.
brain. Come on, we'll
Just
give you a
remember
badge. We'll
what's
give you a
what's the
badge.
phrase? If it's free, you're the product.
Bingo.
Just remember that, y'all. If it's
Bingo.
free, you're the product. So they are using it in some way, right?
Yeah.
We will
Yeah.
have AI AEs very soon that can give a perfect demo at, because here's what's hilarious, right? Because sales leaders say this all the time, or well, I don't know, sales leaders say all the time. It gets people riled up on LinkedIn. They'll be like, we don't want our people to be robots. And it's like, yeah, kind of true. But tell me, sales leaders, that you don't want your people running a great disco process the way you want it run and running the demo the way that you want it run. You do
Yeah.
want robots, right? Like you do want them doing the same predictable things that lead to success, right? That's the issues that we're going to run into here is like,
Yeah.
well, wait a minute. I have a non-distinguishable like person AI that I'm talking to. They actually listen. They don't get paid commission. They pick up on nuances. They pick up on body language. They pick up on words being said. They are well versed in Challenger, Medpick, Spin Spiced. They know exactly how to connect the dots. Oh, and they also understand consumer psychology and buyer psychology. So they know how to
Yeah.
right? Why are we good at what we do? Because we've consumed knowledge like nobody's business for the last decade. And now you have AI consuming all the knowledge of the past decade in a minute and learning how to apply it. So,
and there's a big, I like to throw this in there because I think a lot of people struggle sometimes to see things through the lens of others, and we see things only through our own lens. And there's a big generational component here, which is that it may be difficult for us, even as I think you're about the same age as me. We're old millennials, basically, right? I mean, I'm 1986. I'm 38 years old. But I work in tech and I'm into this stuff, so I consider myself a little ahead of the curve on adapting to this. But it can be harder for older people to maybe envision a world where a person will actually prefer to talk to an AI than a human because they're going to maybe get more reliable responses, or they're not going to have the pressure of the sales tactics and stuff like that. And we already see it happening with Gen Z. I was last Christmas. I remember I was with my niece, and we were talking about Christmas and whatever. And I was like, do you know what Christmas is? Like, did you know who Jesus is? And my mom asked me something. I turned the other way, and I turned back around. My niece is telling me all this stuff about who Jesus is. I'm like, where did you learn that? And then I look. She just asked her Snapchat bot, and it taught her everything in like very coherent, language. And I was like, that is fascinating that like, she didn't just ignore her uncle with the boring question, which I probably would have done at her age. She was curious, but the answer was at her fingertips. And so for her, it wasn't even like she maybe wasn't curious, but she just wanted to, show her uncle that she could figure stuff out. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Like, that is the change that's happening. And that's the same, they're going to use that same behavior when they're shopping for products as they get older. They're not going to want to go talk to some consultant or some industry expert. They're going to go to the AI because they've been trained now, from a young age to do it.
Yeah, that's one place that I'm actually super curious to see what happens in the influencer space, because you can build an influencer AI already, right? That looks, sounds, can say all the things. What I think is actually going to happen there is I think you're going to see like I'll say the destruction of the influencer market, and then actually come back because humans do still want to know other humans like it.
Yeah.
They actually want to know what your human experience is. And so I actually feel that's a place that things start to come back to,
Where
is
you can
like,
sort of replicate your mind, right?
right.
And
Where
I can
it's
have
like,
this
okay,
conversation with AI Kevin Dorsey. You're not even on this call, but I'm getting all pretty much the same responses.
right. So it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. Where like we still are, unless we go full, you know, full matrix mode where people's like they actually prefer the alternative reality than the real reality, and then there's no then we got nothing.
I think to your
Like,
earlier point, it's not a question of if, it's when, right?
like if you
Because
like
each
for the vast
generation will
much,
just adopt more of it because they won't have the prior memories of how things used to be. So that seems to be how it moves on. All right, good stuff, man. So we've really set a good stage here, I think, to chat about what you're working on. You made a big announcement. You're going all in on the Sales Leadership Accelerator. Tell us, what is it? What problems are you solving, and who should get involved?
Yeah, I mean, I guess working backwards, the problem I'm solving is like we've talked about being better for most of this podcast, but most companies have nothing in place to make their sales leaders better. Right? Because the onboarding for a sales leader is less than 1 week. They get taught the sales process. They get taught nothing about how to be a great leader.
I got taught nothing, like
nothing,
zero.
Nothing. They are lucky if maybe they get some like boilerplate HR stuff on here's how to have a tough conversation.
They'll share you on Google Drive folders, and it's your job to dig through it and make sense of it and try to learn the business. Yeah.
So that's the first place, is there's just no coaching and training for sales leaders. And those are your biggest leverage point. If I try to train a sales team, okay, let's say I got 100 reps, I'm trying to train that sales team. Maybe 10 to 20% of them are actually going to apply it and get better. But if I make 10 managers better, 100 reps get better because the managers are better. So I'm trying to solve for that problem where we're just not taught how to run a one-on-one, how to have a coaching conversation, how to run a role play, how to do issue diagnosis, how to create a coaching plan, how to manage up, how to build a forecasting model, how to set quotas. Like, we're just never taught how to do these things, right?
Everyone just mimics what they saw without knowing, is this even the best way to do it, basically?
It's funny, just like a lot of like relationships and life, we either mimic or we reverse. So if you like how you were led, you mimic. If you don't like how you led, people reverse. They go the complete opposite direction, right? My manager never did anything for me. That was so stupid. What a waste of time. They become a micromanager because it's the opposite. They're all up in the business. And someone else like, dude, my manager is a micromanager. I'm going to give my people space and autonomy. They reverse. They never find a balance between it, right? So that's part of it. It's there's courses, there's modules teaching these things, right? The mistakes that we've made for the last decade, packaged up of like, here's how to actually do these things, right?
Are you putting templates in there like for these one-on-ones?
And then it's the systems.
All that.
It's all the templates too. So it's the system. Here's the one-on-one system, the call scorecard system, the coaching system, the issue diagnosis system. There's, I think, 13, 14 templates in there right now that you can then take and then make your own. And then,
so can I use this as a sales manager, sales director, VP? Is kind of hits on all.
It's literally the system I use to run my orgs to the letter, right? You have to take it and make it your own, but this is how I run my orgs, right? It's how I've been able to do multiple scale ups, multiple build ups in different industries, not selling SaaS to SaaS, right? I don't sell SaaS to SaaS. I have stayed out of that space completely, right? Like, so it wasn't like I was just selling to the Zerpers that were raising $50 million every single time, right? Like, so these are how I've scaled these things up, and not lost my complete mind doing so. And then it has the human element where there's a community. We do group monthly group calls where you can jump in and like ask me questions directly, right? If it wasn't covered in the modules, you're dealing with something specific. We have monthly experts. I'd love to have you come in and be one of the monthly experts to come in to talk deep about a certain topic. So like that's what I've built, man. And I'm really, really hoping it becomes like the de facto, like, oh, you're getting to sales leadership, you go through the accelerator. That's just what you do. You haven't gone through the accelerator yet, you're not ready for sales leadership. Like, go in there, go through it, and then come through it. So that's what I've built, man. And it's a passion project. It is not, something that I'm doing full time. I've tried to package it in a way to give it access to as many people possible, to make it affordable so people can go through it and see, man, it's growing. These are also the same things that I've taught companies like HubSpot and DocuSign and Snowflake and Clearwater, TalkDesk. Like, people bring me in to teach them these things, and this gives, I'll say like the common person access to that type of stuff to hopefully level up as a leader. So that's what I've built, man. Sales Leadership Accelerator. I'm excited about it, and we'll see how far it goes.
Well, congrats, man. What's the time commitment look like? If I'm, let's say I'm, I want to jump in, I want to start learning some stuff. Obviously, you can dive in forever to the community element if you're attending monthly sessions, but to get through the basic program, what's that look like?
I mean, the leadership content alone is roughly 13 hours. Right?
Okay.
This is not a micro.
Like, this is not like you need to spend the next 5 years. You can.
No. That's 13 hours to go through that. There's the sales content. That's another 10. Like, if you wanted to go through everything once, you're talking about 20, 24 to 30 hours of like true like focused attention time, which is 50x the amount of training most managers get in their entire career, right? Most managers don't get 30 hours of leadership training in their career, let alone like together and like in one place. So it's not a ton of time. Most of the time actually falls into the application. Okay, here's what you learned.
Now how do you actually apply it?
Right? Yeah. Take the template, make it your own, and actually apply it. That's where the focus really needs to go.
Are you encouraging aspiring leaders to join, or should they wait until they have that role?
So no, I'm definitely encouraging aspiring, because the best time to learn this stuff is before you're a leader, because you're not going to get trained. That's what happens, is like people will wait. Well, I just got promoted. Well, shit, now you're already a leader and you don't know this stuff. Whereas if you had learned this before you became a leader, it's going to make that transition so much easier. And I have multiple examples now in the community where people like word for word is like, this is how I got my new job. This is how I got promoted, because I was speaking to things they had never heard before.
That's where I was like, headed with that. Yeah.
Like I've gotten people VP jobs. They're like, when I walked them through the BIPSI methodology, they're like, this is amazing. Like, okay, like it's landing people jobs because there's the context behind it in a system. People love systems, y'all, if you can show them the how, because they'll ask you, they're like, how do you run your one-on-ones? If you can show them how. Well, how do you set quotas? I can show them how. How do you issue diagnosis? I can show them how. People are like, holy shit, like, okay, we know it. We know you can do these things. So yeah, man, it's really starting to have impact on people, and I love it. Just love it.
Awesome. Well, congrats. Where can people go to check it out?
Salesleadershipaccelerator.com. Go check it out. There's a free training on there. It's 44 minutes long that like walks you through the methodology, like as a foundation. Even if you just go watch that and apply it, you will be a better leader. And that's not me just blowing smoke. Like, go watch that and learn the methodology of how to be a great leader and how to scale things. Go take that and apply it, and it's worth the entire program, right? So, and there's just so much more behind it. So salesleadershipaccelerator.com, you can check it out there, and, hopefully people get in there and do something with it.
Love it, Kevin. Thank you, man. We dropped some bombs here. Everyone follow Kevin Dorsey on LinkedIn, salesleadershipaccelerator.com. All right, everyone, check it out. And Kevin, it's great catching up, man.
Hell yeah. Thanks, my dude.